Thanks, Philip, and welcome to Today in Putnam County. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're having a great weekend. My goal with the show is to take a look at all the great events, interview some of the amazing community leaders that make Putnam County a great place to live, work, and raise their families. So let's get started this morning. My special guest this morning is District Attorney General, Mr. Bryant Dunaway.
Good morning,
Bryant.
Good morning. How you doing, Randy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here this
I appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
5 years has went by in a hurry, hasn't it, since we ran for office in 2014?
It has. It's been just a kind of a windstorm. 5 years passes so fast, and we're already looking toward the next term.
2022 will be here before we know it.
It will. It will.
So you've been in office 5 years now. You're doing a great job. Our community is growing, booming. But before, you had a life as an attorney before, and for our listeners, can you give us a little history of your life in Putnam County and what you did before you became Attorney General, and kind of why you wanted to get into this?
Yeah, glad to. My life in Putnam County began when I moved here in about 1989. I transferred colleges from South Florida to Tennessee Tech, and I rolled into Cookeville sight unseen, and it was a much smaller, quaint town then than it is today. Of course, we still love it. So I was a Tennessee Tech student in my first years in Cookeville. My first job after graduation was a Cookeville police officer. Worked several years as a police officer. I think that's when I first got to meet you.
It is. That's been a long
when you
time
were
ago.
with EMS for so many years.
That's right.
And then I worked there for several years, and as I enjoyed that job immensely, met lots of good people, and did good work, but my mind began to move to other options, and it occurred to me that I should go to law school. So I left the police department after a few years and went back to school. Attended law school. After I graduated from law school, I continued to stay here. In the meantime, I'd met my wonderful wife. She and I have been married for 24 years, and we've grown a family together with 3 children. As I began to practice law after law school, I was in private practice for many years here in Cookeville. Kept an office here in Cookeville and practiced in the whole Upper Cumberland area. Then just something started to eat at me a little bit. I had a few community leaders approach me about the idea of potentially running for district attorney. They'd known I'd been a police officer and had a law enforcement background prior to law school, and had a few people who come to me and encourage me. And my initial reaction was, no, I don't think I want to do that. My practice is good and it's thriving. But it's one of those, I feel like it's one of those God things.
I agree.
I sat there in bed at night and didn't say anything to anybody, and this thought just continued to permeate through my mind. And finally, I decided I need to have a discussion with my wife. And I said, this idea of running for district attorney is really eating at me and making me think. And I think I might want to do it. And so we began discussions, and the first person I had to sell on the idea was my wife. Because it's
a team effort.
It is, and as you know, running for any office, it's a sacrifice, and you risk a lot.
That's right.
You're not guaranteed to win.
No.
And so once she gave me the green light, then it was I gave myself a deadline to decide, and I'm glad that I did. It has been the best job I've ever had in my life. It is in a position. I feel like I'm in a position that I can do a lot of good for the community.
Well, and you do, and you have. The experience, though, that you received being a police officer, being an attorney, then into district attorney, that had to be a huge help in your job now. 5 years into it, though, I asked everyone that comes on the show, try to, is there one thing that surprised you that you didn't know about the job going into it that surprised you the most?
Well, I didn't have any huge surprises. I kind of understood what it was, what the job entailed to be a district attorney, having worked in law enforcement and been an attorney, but you never truly understand what the job entails until you sit in that chair, because you have that responsibility and the decision making that you have. Some of the decisions I have to make are humbling. They affect lives, and so you don't understand that. But I guess the biggest shock that I had, if you could call it that, was the sheer volume of child sex abuse cases that we have in our communities. None of us are surprised that we have a drug problem.
Right.
We know we have occasional violent crime, but the community at large would be absolutely taken back if they could wrap their mind around and understand the sheer volume of sexual abuse against children. And it's prevalent in our communities, and the volume is high.
We have our blinders on sometimes, don't we? As
We do.
we walk through life, we have our own jobs, we have our own lives. It's easy to put our blinders on and not see that stuff, but it's going on in our community. To me, that would be one of the hardest things to deal with on a day-to-day basis for you and your folks that work for you. How do you deal with that?
Well, you try not to take it, you try not to take it home with you, but you can't help it. If you have a conscience and you have a heart for the work that you do, what we do, you do take some of it home, and we all have. Most of us have children, and you just, I guess you deal with it by just. I deal with it by just going home and hugging my children and making sure that they don't have to be exposed to that evil world that we sometimes have to deal with. And just kind of separate it somewhat. But you have to have a good attitude about the work you do in law enforcement and in emergency services. All those types of professions see ugly things. And you have
to feel like you're doing good, though, to help those.
You're doing good, and you're accomplishing justice. You're helping victims, and you're holding people accountable that prey on others. And if you look at it that way, and you know in your heart you're doing some good things, then it's easier to deal with.
So you have a special, talking about the child sex abuse, you have a special prosecutor that handles these on a day-to-day basis?
I didn't used to. When I came into office, there was not a dedicated, specialized child abuse prosecutor. And since I've been in office and recognized the volume of those types of cases, I created a specialized child abuse prosecutor, and her name was Caroline Knight, and still is, obviously. But she was all she handled was child sex abuse cases. Just this year, in 2019, I had to create a second specialized prosecutor for child abuse. So to give you an idea of the volume of that, I have myself, I'm the district attorney. I have 14 assistant district attorneys. 2 of them, all they do is child sex abuse cases and child pornography prosecutions. So 1/7 of my prosecution staff is focused on just that type of crime.
And I think that shocks the normal listener, the normal citizen in our county. It's not just in Putnam County, it's in the whole United States, it's in the whole country, that in the world, that we've got to a point that those things are going on. I'm like you, I can deal with the drug problems and all these other things going on. That stuff really gets to me, and I can't imagine that ever happening to my child or my grandchild, and I feel so much for those victims that have to go through that. You've done an amazing job, though, of setting up the special prosecution. I can't imagine those folks on a day-to-day basis, though, although we know that they know they're doing good and they're putting these bad people behind bars and making sure that they're taken out of society. That's got to help.
It does help. And so, it's just a unique crime, and people get burnt out on it. So I'm always constantly keeping my finger on the pulse of both the law enforcement investigators who investigate those types of crimes and the prosecutors, because it can wear on you after a while when you see children abused time after time, and sometimes you need a break from it and kind of do something different. So we're always kind of keeping our finger on the health of our prosecutors and investigators.
Pulse of the team. You're listening to Today in Putnam County on News Talk 107.7 and 1400 The Hub. I'm Randy Porter, your host. More with District Attorney Bryant Dunaway when we come back. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Today in Putnam County. I'm your host, County Mayor Randy Porter. Hope you're having a great Saturday morning. My guest this morning is District Attorney Bryant Dunaway, and we talked about child sex abuse, which is terrible, and you prosecute a lot of those. Probably the number one thing that people see the most and hear the most about is probably our drug problem, isn't it, Bryant?
It is. It's the most, recognized problem in our communities, and it permeates most things. All types of crimes, with the exception of child sex abuse, I think, have some kind of drug element to it. And, I describe the drug trends as I like to say criminals are the smartest drug people, the smartest dumb people.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they adjust. So, we mentioned back in the early 90s when I worked at the police department, back in the early 90s, I've never heard the word methamphetamine. Wasn't here, wasn't in our community,
Right.
Didn't even know what it was if I saw it.
Right.
Fast forward to the late 90s, and it's everywhere. And people are cooking it in meth labs, and they're cooking it in their backyards, and we have these volatile, explosive, dangerous labs where people are making it here. And so some legislation has helped that. The legislature passed some laws to rein that in somewhat, and it was effective. But that didn't get rid of the meth.
Just got rid of the cooking.
It got rid of
around.
the local cooking of
Yeah.
the meth. And so then we kind of began our opiate trend, you know, in recent years, in the last decade, with, you know, things that facilitated that were the Intractable Pain Act that passed and the legislature wisely repealed later. But the opiates kind of have permeated our problem, and we have a very large opiate epidemic in this area. But meth has not gone away.
No, it's still
Meth
there.
just gets imported now.
Coming from Mexico and
It's
other
imported
places.
into our community. Meth is as big of a problem as opiates are. You know, they're equal. They're both very challenging for us. So you don't have the meth labs anymore cooking locally, but you still have the drug being brought into our community from other places. And so they adjust and things change. And so now, as we make headway on the opiate problem and we begin to educate medical providers about, you know, being mindful of
What they
responsible
write. Yes.
prescribing and that type of thing, as that education makes headway, and it is. Once again, the drug problem ebbs and flows and adjusts. Now in this community, unfortunately, in our community, we are seeing the influx of heroin and other drugs like fentanyl. In our community today, we have a lot of overdose deaths in our community. There's rarely a week that goes by that I don't get a phone call that we've got an overdose death as a result of you know, the ingestion of drugs. And it's rarely a week that goes by. And so we detected maybe a year and a half ago that fentanyl was the culprit in many of those overdose deaths. And we really didn't recognize that before, because when bodies were sent for autopsy by the medical examiner, fentanyl wasn't really a drug that was routinely
Right.
tested.
Right.
And when we started suspecting fentanyl was present on the street, we started requesting that be tested, and many times that's the result of the cause of the death.
Because of that.
And you know, what's dangerous about what's happening now is that what we're seeing is that there's a concoction or a mixture of drugs. For example, you may have seen in the news recently the 4 individuals in Hamilton County who believed they were smoking marijuana,
Right.
and that marijuana was laced with fentanyl
Right.
and killed them. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing compounds, I guess you would say, a mixture of concoction of different types of drugs. And I don't know if I know you're familiar with fentanyl. It does have a medical purpose, but the way we're seeing it on the street is killing people. And it's a minute amount of fentanyl can kill you. It's measured in what's called micrograms.
It is. Back in my EMS days, when fentanyl came along as a painkiller that we were carrying
Yes.
on the ambulance, very small dosages, does a great job. It has a purpose.
It does.
When it comes to pain, controlling pain with people that's been involved in trauma and so forth. I never thought that we'd see it though laced in other drugs, and to the extent that we saw it in. Of course, I worked as coroner for a while, you know, well, for many years, and of course Tommy Copeland's a coroner now, and we're constantly talking about all the drug overdoses and deaths that we're seeing in our young people because they're using a drug, even though it's illegal, some of the prescription stuff, that somebody's laced it with something that is very dangerous to the fentanyl, even getting it on your fingers and absorbed through the skin.
Yeah, it's
can-
absorbed
can kill
transdermally.
you.
And not only, you know, that raises a lot of other issues and concerns with fentanyl specifically, because you can absorb it through your skin and it can kill you in that way. So we're constantly warning and cautioning law enforcement officers who are out here dealing with people. They make a drug arrest, they make a traffic stop, and they see this substance, don't really know what it is, can't identify it on the street, but if they were to happen to touch it and be fentanyl,
Could be gone.
it can kill our officers and our emergency service workers and our firemen. And so they're dealing with these people on the street, and unknowingly they have to take extra precautions in
Right.
dealing with unknown substances as
Right.
they deal with the public. And so it's a concern on many levels.
We're talking with Bryant Dunaway, our district attorney here in Putnam County and for our region. Bryant, you did something that I admired you for when it came to the drug problem and our opiate prescription drugs being written and folks being addicted to those. You brought a lawsuit. You took upon yourself to bring a lawsuit, not just for Putnam County, but all the counties that you cover, to go against those drug companies.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's ongoing, and we're litigating that in the hot and heavy. There's a group of about 14 district attorneys across the state, and we got together and we wanted to think outside the box and try to do something a little bit different. Instead of just trying to prosecute, we wanted to do something different to try to affect the opiate epidemic, and it has lots of levels. And one of those things was we brought a civil lawsuit on behalf of the counties that are in our judicial districts. And the legislature allows us to do that in a body of law called the Drug Dealer Liability Act. And we sued Pharma and Endo and Mallinckrodt and all of these producers, and the discovery in those suits has really been eye-opening to us as we have begun to dig into the evidence. And we're trying to hold them accountable. They certainly facilitated the overprescribing problem in this state. You know, one of the issues, a year and a half ago, the number was that there was 1.18 opiate prescriptions per person in Tennessee.
Wow.
And to give you an illustration, there are 5 people that live in my house, Randy, and we don't have any opiate prescriptions. So when there's better than 1 prescription per person in this state, there's an issue with overprescribing.
Absolutely.
And we've made headway with that in education with the medical community, though.
Did I hear in some states, this is happening in other states too, where they're suing, going after these manufacturers? Did some of them are they trying to settle now with some of these?
There is some discussion on settlement. What's unique about our lawsuits is we're in state court, and that's where we want to be.
You don't want to be.
And so most of the lawsuits you may hear reported on the news, they are tied up in federal court in what's called an MDL, a multi-district litigation, all centered in, I think, Cincinnati. And those are all in federal court. Well, the Mallinckrodt and Purdue, the manufacturers of those opiates, they've tried to get our suits removed to the federal court, and we've been successful in stopping that. So we're on a fast track to try our suits in state court, and progress is being made while the U.S. District Court cases in the federal system are kind of stalling at the moment.
So you did great.
Thank
with
you.
bringing that lawsuit. I applaud you for doing that. Instead of each one of the counties having to take it upon themselves to try to do something, you did it for
Yes, sir.
our whole region. So that's great. We're talking with Attorney General. I guess everybody calls you General when I go to meetings. General
It still
Dunaway.
takes some getting used to, even 5 years into it.
District Attorney General Bryant Dunaway this morning on Today in Putnam County. Here on News Talk 107.7 and 1400 The Hub. More with Bryant when we come back. So stay with us. Welcome back to Today in Putnam County. I'm your host, County Mayor Randy Porter. I hope you're having a great Saturday morning. My guest this morning is District Attorney General Bryant Dunaway, and we've been talking about a lot of the cases that, Bryant, that you and your team handle. One of them that is a big problem, not only here but across the country, is domestic violence. You're also the chairman of a group called
Family
Family Justice Center that you and I sit on the board of that and helps deal with that. Can you talk a little bit about the problem that we're seeing in our community?
Yeah, domestic violence is, you know, it's one of those unique areas that's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
To give you an idea, it is one of the areas of prosecution and enforcement where often the victim of the crime is uncooperative with law enforcement as well as prosecution, and so it's challenging. You have to balance the providing services and support to victims in the context of a really family dynamic that's crumbling and a relationship dynamic that's crumbling, and you have to take it serious because there's many times where I have to make the hard decision to move forward with prosecution of a domestic violence offender when the victim is begging me not to.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I do that, and we take a pretty strong stance on domestic violence because, to give you an illustration, I think I have 12 or 13 homicide cases pending right now that we're moving toward trial. 11 of them are domestic violence.
So if you
don't, it quickly
can end bad.
escalates. In fact, I can't talk too much about it right now, but right here in Putnam County, we have a case pending right now, which I'll be having a hearing on this week, where it was an individual who was charged with domestic violence, and the next domestic violence event took the life of the victim. And so those types of things, if you don't hold people accountable, then they escalate quickly, and lives can be lost, and they are often lost.
You started something, I think you called it specialized prosecution.
Yes, sir.
But you have members of your team that they solely dedicate their time to one specific type of case. Is
That's
that
right. That's correct. And so there are certain areas, all crimes are prosecuted in this district by my office, and I have a staff of 14 attorneys in my criminal division, and most of them handle the regular dockets. They'll handle all the different types of prosecution. But I've created what I call specialized prosecutors in my office that that focus on real problem areas. I've already, I mentioned the child sex abuse prosecutors earlier that I created. Those two attorneys only handle child sex abuse cases, but two other problem areas that are really problematic for public safety are domestic violence and impaired driving. So domestic violence, I have a prosecutor in my office, and that's all she does. The only type of case she handles is domestic violence. So there's a specialized focus on that.
Well, she gets good at it, doesn't she?
She does. She gets good at it.
If they do that day in, day out.
Yeah. And I also have a dedicated victim witness coordinator just for that purpose. And then impaired driving is the other thing. That's a real public safety issue. One of the things we've mentioned, drugs. Most people, when you say DUI, the first thing that comes to their mind is drunk driving or alcohol.
Right.
And we still have alcohol problem in driving,
Sure.
but a growing number, I would say better than 30% of the impaired driving cases that we see and prosecute are not alcohol related at all, but they are drug related. So
Still falls under the DUI.
it's impaired driving, and so I like to get the public's mind off of drunk driving and not using that terminology, because that kind of lends itself to thinking about alcohol. We like to refer to it as impaired driving, because you can be impaired by alcohol or drugs, prescription drugs, illicit drugs,
Right.
anything that affects your motor skills and thinking is a serious public safety issue.
You're also, I think, on one of the Governor Lee's committees. He's looking strongly at criminal justice reform.
He is. Governor Lee is one of the things that he has made very vocal is that he wants to look at the criminal justice system and see what changes are appropriate, how it can be made efficient, as I understand it. And I was blessed to be asked to be on one of his committees related to substance abuse and mental health, which are two of the real problems.
Problems here in Putnam County and across the state.
So many of the people that we deal with in the criminal justice system are really dealing with those two issues,
Right.
mental health and substance abuse. And so I was glad to serve on that committee for him, and we've met several times, and our goal is to recommend to the governor in that area what legislative changes might need to be made and what kind of policies might need to be implemented. So there are several subcommittees that he's formed, and I'm just glad to be a part of that one.
So, criminal justice reform, looking at changing the laws, and maybe, are you looking at some of the smaller offenses of not having to jail those people?
We've implemented, yes. So we've implemented some things right here in this county, some programs that have kind of helped with that. One of those things, an example, is a pre-arrest diversion program that we've implemented in Putnam County. And so officers, when they deal with people that have mental health issues, many times they have to arrest them because they are causing a disturbance in the community, so they arrest them for small offenses like public intoxication or disorderly conduct, and they have to book them into the jail. Well, we've got an up and running program called pre-arrest diversion, where officers have the option to take somebody that they recognize as dealing with substance abuse or mental health and not take them to the jail, but instead take them over to the pre-arrest diversion center located at Plateau Mental Health Center, volunteer behavior. And so there they can be detoxed and provided treatment for mental health, and keep those minor criminal offenses out of the jail, and still try to get those people the mental health treatment that they need.
Well, they're not a hazard to the society. They've committed a crime. They need to be punished, but they're not necessarily a hazard to the
That's right. So there's all kinds of irons in the
crime.
fire to try to be more efficient with our system.
You have a lot going on. Most people don't realize, I don't think, the area you cover, 6 counties?
7.
7 counties.
Yeah, it's the largest judicial district in the state of Tennessee. So we have 7 counties, Putnam being the largest by population, and then I have Pickett, Clay, Overton, Putnam, Cumberland, Blight, and DeKalb. So that's my judicial district.
You do a great
Thank
job,
you.
Bryant. It's a pleasure to serve with you as an elected official. You brought a great ethical stature to your job, and I think everyone sees that in the community.